History books tell you the war ended in 1945, but what they don't tell you is the terrifying truth about what happened behind closed doors. Deep in hidden bunkers and black sites, Nazi scientists ran experiments so horrifying, even their own leaders tried to bury them forever. From dream control to contact with unknown forces, these are the dark operations you were never meant to hear about. These are the 5 Nazi experiments so disturbing, they were erased from history. This is Unsolved Archives, where lost cases live on. Beneath the dense pine forests of Lower Silesia, buried under layers of time and secrecy, lay the remains of a forgotten Nazi facility, a facility that once held one of the Third Reich's darkest and most disturbing experiments. Known only in fragmented documents as Der Flusterraum, or the Whispering Room, this psychological experiment was designed not to kill, but to shatter the human mind in silence. In 1942, under the supervision of the SS Ahnenerbe Division, a group dedicated to pseudoscientific and occult research, construction began on a subterranean complex near the village of Xias. To the villagers, it was just another extension of the war machine, another place where men vanished and screams echoed through the trees. But for the scientists selected for the Whispering Room project, it was a temple of mental control, the edge of a dark frontier. The chamber itself was buried 30 meters underground. The entrance was camouflaged as a maintenance shaft in the forest, guarded by elite SS units. Inside, winding concrete tunnels led to a single steel door. Beyond it, a soundproof, windowless, featureless square room, 4 meters by 4 meters, with reinforced concrete walls lined with layers of cork, lead, and foam. No sound could enter. None could escape. Subjects, primarily Polish, Roma, and Soviet prisoners, were selected for the strength of their resistance to Nazi indoctrination. These were people considered mentally unbreakable. That was exactly what the Whispering Room sought to prove wrong. Inside the room, no clocks were provided. No sounds, no light, no stimuli. Prisoners were fed through a silent sliding panel. They were left alone, in absolute silence, for days, weeks, even months. At first, most subjects shouted. They screamed, cried, begged. But the chamber ate their sounds. Eventually, they fell into a deep, disorienting silence. Days passed like fog. Some broke after only a few days. One man, a former Soviet officer, began speaking to people who weren't there. He insisted his dead brother had returned and was whispering from inside the walls. Another woman reportedly carved her fingernails down to the bone trying to dig out the voices from her skull. The most infamous case was that of prisoner number 9347, a 17-year-old girl from Krakow named Emilia. She lasted 46 days. At first, she refused food. She meditated, remained still, breathing slowly to conserve energy. But by the 3rd week, she began whispering, constantly. Not to herself, but to someone she called Father in the floor. Researchers recorded her through hidden surveillance equipment. She spoke in riddles and ancient Latin, a language she had never learned. Emilia's final message before being removed from the chamber was a chilling phrase, spoken in German. He lives in the silence now. She was declared catatonic and never spoke again. She died 2 years later in an asylum in Berlin, and her brain was removed for further study. Its whereabouts remain unknown. The project was overseen by SS Hauptsturmführer Dieter Graus, a man with no formal psychiatric training but a deep belief in mind control and Aryan supremacy. Graus believed that silence was the purest form of domination, a means of erasing personal identity and replacing it with Nazi will. He wrote in his private journal, "Sound is memory. Remove sound and you erase the past. What remains is ours to write." By 1944, as the tide of war turned, the Whispering Room was abandoned. But not by choice. Soviet troops closing in from the east triggered a mass evacuation. In the rush, several documents were burned, and the facility was rigged with explosives. But the detonation only partially collapsed the tunnel, preserving much of the chamber's core structure. For decades, the room became the subject of urban legend. Locals warned of the silent forest, where birds never sang and where people vanished. In 1993, A team of amateur urban explorers rediscovered part of the underground complex. They reported extreme disorientation, nausea, and sudden nosebleeds upon entering the remains of the chamber. One of them, a student named Tomasz, began mumbling in his sleep in German, despite never having learned the language. What little evidence survives today is scattered: a fragment of an SS officer's notebook, 2 partial reels of surveillance film, and 3 surviving audio recordings, all featuring nothing but faint breathing, static, and the occasional unmistakable whisper. Analysis showed the whisper was not from any prisoner, but from an unseen source. A voice that seemed to echo, without direction, throughout the chamber. Modern psychologists have speculated that the whispering room experiment was a crude, horrific attempt at inducing schizophrenia-like symptoms through environmental deprivation. But others believe something deeper happened, something beyond science. Some researchers point out that the precise materials used in the room, lead, cork, foam, and steel, created a kind of Faraday cage, blocking not just sound but electromagnetic signals. One fringe theorist proposed that the Nazis had inadvertently created a portal to an altered state of consciousness, or something worse. The Nazi scientists may not have fully understood what they created. Or perhaps they did, and fled before it could consume them too. Today, access to the Whispering Room's remnants is restricted by Polish authorities. The site is unmarked, unvisited. Officials deny its existence. But those who live nearby still report hearing faint whispers in the forest at night, especially during the winter months when the air is still and the snow dampens all outside noise. It is said that if you stand alone in that forest long enough, you'll begin to hear your own name whispered from nowhere. And once you hear it, you never stop. In the sterile white chambers of Block 10 at Auschwitz, the world of science and horror blurred under the cold hands of Dr. Joseph Mengele. While history has recorded his obsession with twins for eugenics purposes, seeking to prove Aryan superiority through heredity, there remains one set of experiments that even the most meticulous Nazi records barely whisper of. They were part of a secret project, known only among the highest ranks of SS medical officers as Die Spiegelkinder, the mirror children. Officially, Mengele's twin experiments were about measurements, comparing growth, disease resistance, and anatomical development between siblings. But behind the locked doors of a hidden annex in the far wing of the Auschwitz hospital, he embarked on something else, something darker. He wasn't just comparing twins. He was trying to make them become one another. Not just in body but in mind. The project began in 1943. Only the most promising twin sets were selected, identical in appearance, in health, in age. They were children, aged 6 to 12, most of them taken from Jewish and Roma families. The earliest tests began innocently: joint exercise, synchronized routines, mirrored conversations. The twins were encouraged to mimic each other's movements in perfect unity. A game at first. But soon, the methods escalated. Twins were forcibly strapped into facing chairs, unable to move, for hours a day. They were made to stare into each other's eyes without blinking, sometimes for 10 or more hours, while low, droning tones played through hidden speakers. They were deprived of food and sleep unless they responded to commands simultaneously. Any hesitation from one would lead to punishment for both. Mengele introduced a system of reward and punishment that deepened the psychological trauma. If one twin showed emotion, the other was hurt. If one disobeyed, the other starved. This established an unnatural, obsessive bond between the siblings, forcing them to regulate not only their own behavior but their twins as well. The most documented case, though still shrouded in mystery, involved Leni and Lissel Bauer, twin girls from Munich who were just 8 years old when captured. They had been held separately upon arrival, but were reunited under Mengele's care. According to the limited surviving transcripts, they were unusually compliant, eerily quiet, and highly intelligent. 4 months, the girls were subject to what Mengele called psychic resonance induction. He believed, or pretended to believe, that identical twins, under extreme psychological pressure, could develop a mental link, similar to telepathy. To test this theory, one twin was isolated in a soundproof room while the other was subjected to pain, sudden lights, or emotional trauma. Researchers in the other room documented whether the untouched twin reacted in any way. In the case of the Bauer girls, they often did. One account notes that when Lissel's hand was submerged in ice water until her skin turned blue, Lenny, 3 rooms away, blindfolded, began shivering uncontrollably. Another time, a guard slapped Lissel across the face for failing to answer a question. Lenny gasped simultaneously, though she had been unaware of the interrogation. Even more bizarre was an incident recorded in February 1944. During a test, both girls were instructed to write a word on a piece of paper simultaneously, without seeing or hearing each other. In 3 out of 5 tests, they wrote the same word. Not similar, the exact same word, including one that neither had previously been taught, glanslos, meaning lusterless or dim. That word would later appear repeatedly in Lenny's journal, often written over and over until the pages tore. But whatever Mengele was chasing, mind control, unity, or the merging of consciousness, he wanted more. Eventually, he began surgical interventions. In his notes, he referred to this phase as the unification. Twins were anesthetized and connected via makeshift intravenous tubing, Mengele's attempt to share blood between them, keeping it flowing in a loop. He hypothesized that circulating the same blood would force synchronization between brainwaves. But hygiene was not a concern, and within days, many pairs succumbed to sepsis. Those who lived were left permanently scarred. The Bauer twins, again, became a central focus. Mengele ordered exploratory brain procedures while the girls were sedated. Electrodes were implanted at the base of their skulls, rudimentary devices connected to a voltage machine. With the turn of a dial, electricity was passed between the girls, through thin copper wires, while they were instructed to recite the same phrases. They never screamed. Even when the current burned their necks, they sat in silence, staring straight ahead. Mengele was pleased. In the summer of 1944, a visitor, an SS general from Himmler's inner circle, attended a demonstration. Lenny and Lissel performed a synchronized recitation of Goethe's Erlkönig, standing at opposite ends of the room. When one raised her hand, the other did too. When one turned in a circle, the other followed, perfectly timed. The general reportedly applauded and asked if they were connected. Mengele replied, "In every way that matters." But shortly before the Soviet advance, something unexpected happened. The girls began displaying erratic behavior. They spoke in their own language, understood by no one. They wrote mirror script notes backward, sometimes in reverse Latin phrases. Guards said they would sit motionless in the corner for hours, holding hands and whispering to someone who wasn't there. On January 15, 1945, 3 days before Auschwitz was liberated, the girls vanished. No records of execution. No graves. Mengele's own files show a single entry that day: Die Spiegel sind zerbrochen. The mirrors are broken. Some believe Mengele moved them to another location. Others claim the girls died during an experiment too horrific to record. But survivors of the camp, those who lived in adjacent barracks, remember something strange. One woman recalled hearing the laughter of 2 children echoing through the snow-covered grounds long after the guards had fled. In 1978, a former Mossad agent investigating Mengele's escape reported receiving an anonymous envelope in Buenos Aires. Inside was a photograph of 2 elderly women, standing hand in hand in front of a mirror. They wore identical dresses, and on the back was written in German, "Wir sind niemals allein gewesen." We were never alone. To this day, the true fate of the mirror twins remains unknown. But the legacy of Mengele's experiment continues to haunt the ruins of Auschwitz, where countless children once stood side by side, and learned that even love between siblings could be turned into a weapon. In the frozen morning hours of October 1943, a quiet transport arrived at the Ravensbrück concentration camp, carrying not weapons or laborers, but a collection of psychologists, neurologists, and scribes from the Reich Ministry of the Interior. Their mission was not marked by steel or bullets, but by pens, paper, and silence. Officially, they were there to observe the health of prisoners. Unofficially, they were initiating one of the most sinister and overlooked psychological operations of the Third Reich, Operation Sorrow. Unlike the gruesome vivisections or hypothermia trials occurring elsewhere, this project left no bruises. Its goal wasn't bodily damage, it was mental collapse, achieved through one of humanity's most devastating emotions, grief. The logic behind Operation Sorrow was terrifyingly simple. Grief weakens the human mind. It distorts perception, reduces physical health, and shatters decision-making. The SS theorized that, under controlled conditions, grief could be manipulated, weaponized even, to dissolve resistance and force compliance without ever lifting a hand. The subjects were chosen carefully. Not random prisoners, but women who had proven emotionally resilient, who had shown leadership among the captives. Teachers, mothers, nurses. Their strength made them ideal test subjects for psychological undoing. At the core of the operation was a technique known as empathisch Erschöpfung, empathic exhaustion. Prisoners were made to form emotional bonds under false pretenses, only to have those bonds violently severed through lies, forged deaths, or forced betrayals. The most notorious of these trials involved a woman named Helena Voigt, a Czech political prisoner and former schoolteacher. Records indicate that she was approached by a doctor, posing as a sympathetic German nurse. This woman told Helena her teenage daughter was still alive and being held in another section of the camp. Over the next 3 weeks, Helena received forged letters written in her daughter's handwriting. They described survival, hope, and longing. But the letters weren't real. They were written by another prisoner under duress, chosen because her handwriting closely resembled Helena's daughter's. When Helena began smiling again, standing straighter, talking of the future, the SS observed silently, noting each behavior shift. Her emotional revival was complete. Then came the severance. One morning, a camp official informed Helena, coldly, that her daughter had died the previous night of pneumonia. A burned child's shoe was presented as proof. Helena collapsed. Within 72 hours, she ceased speaking entirely. 10 days later, she refused food. She died not from disease, but from despair. Operation Sorrow wasn't just about one woman, it was scaled. Entire micro-communities were manufactured within the women's barracks. Prisoners were told they were cousins, sisters, even mothers and daughters. They were placed together, encouraged to support each other, and given hope, carefully rationed like food. When emotional bonds were formed, guards would intervene. Sometimes one person was taken and returned in a mutilated state, prompting guilt and helplessness. Other times, they simply disappeared, leaving behind questions and emotional voids. It was not chaos, it was cold, calculated sorrow. Grief by design. One of the few written testimonies came from a prisoner known only by her number, 44-82. After the war, she testified to British investigators, describing an incident where she and another inmate were told they had surviving husbands. They received letters, loving, detailed, encouraging. Months passed. Then, without warning, they were shown photographs of their husbands hanging from trees, allegedly executed for their collaboration. The photos were staged. The men were already dead, long before the letters were written. Prisoner 44-82 said she awoke for weeks hearing the other woman scream her husband's name in her sleep. Then one night, the screaming stopped. She had hanged herself with a torn sheet. The masterminds of Operation Sorrow weren't ordinary SS officers. The files recovered after the war revealed the involvement of Dr. Ulrich Mahler, a Nazi psychiatrist and student of Carl Jung's early theories on archetypal emotion. Mahler believed that grief was a spiritual wound, one that, if opened wide enough, could let new ideology in. He once wrote, "In the depth of sorrow, the soul is most vulnerable. There, the Reich may find its home." Mahler also explored whether grief could be reversed and rechanneled, used not just to break, but to rebuild. Some survivors were given new families to attach to, all fabricated. They were made to believe they had survived because of the Führer's mercy. If they embraced this idea, they were rewarded with slightly improved conditions. A blanket, a warm meal, a softer tone from the guards. For some, this planted Stockholm Syndrome. For others, it caused such cognitive dissonance that they suffered complete mental breakdowns. A rare Soviet photo from early 1945 shows the aftermath of the final phase of Operation Sorrow. In a section of the camp nicknamed the Quiet Wing, 12 women sit against a wall, completely still, their faces blank. Not fear. Not pain. Just emptiness. All of them had been subject to sustained emotional manipulation for over 6 months. Only 2 survived the liberation. Both spent the rest of their lives in psychiatric care. In 1957, a sealed file was uncovered in East Berlin, labeled Project Wormwood, Project Wormwood. Inside were transcripts of interviews with SS officers involved in the operation. One passage reads, "They broke like porcelain. Sometimes it took weeks. Sometimes only days. It was not violence. It was worse. They broke themselves." Despite its psychological brutality, Operation Sorrow was largely overshadowed by the more visible atrocities of the Holocaust. But historians today are beginning to re-evaluate its place, not only as a tool of torture, but as an early, crude attempt at emotional reprogramming. Grief, the Nazis learned, was a quiet weapon, and it left no fingerprints. Though most of the Ravensbrück complex has been converted into a memorial, the Eastern Corridor, where the Quiet Wing once stood, remains sealed. Not due to safety, but, as the curator explained in a hushed voice, out of respect for those who were broken there. Still, some visitors claim they can feel something when walking past the shuttered hall. A heaviness in the chest. A sudden tightness in the throat. A presence, they say, not angry, not vengeful, but unbearably, inconsolably sad. In the winter of 1944, as the Third Reich began to crumble under the pressure of Allied advances, an increasingly desperate group of Nazi occultists initiated a final, classified experiment in the Bavarian Alps, one that combined mysticism, radio technology, and the belief in an ancient, hidden power. This operation was known as Die Vril Transmissions, or the Vril Transmissions. The foundation of the project stemmed from an obscure belief system adopted by elements of the SS and the Thule Society, a secretive organization deeply rooted in Aryan mythology and esoteric pseudo-history. These mystics believed in Vril, a form of energy said to be both psychic and physical, a cosmic force used by a prehistoric master race who had lived inside the earth. The Nazis, in their obsession with lost civilizations and racial purity, were convinced this force could be harnessed for ultimate domination. Mental, spiritual, even technological. By late 1943, after a failed expedition to Antarctica and multiple deaths among senior Thule members, a splinter group within the SS Occult Research Division proposed a radical theory. If the Vril energy was truly a frequency, one that resonated from the Earth's core, it might be heard. Or more specifically, received. Thus began the construction of Station Black Echo, a top-secret listening post carved into a remote mountainside near Königssee Lake. The facility was disguised as a weather station, but its interior was more akin to a cathedral of wires and coils. At its heart stood the resonator, a towering, obsidian-coated parabolic receiver flanked by Tesla coils, vacuum tubes, and ancient runic carvings. Every wall was layered with copper mesh, forming a crude Faraday cage designed to filter all external noise. The goal: tune into the frequency of the Earth, not to study seismic activity, but to intercept transmissions from the so-called inner Earth. To listen to the Vril. On February 3, 1944, the resonator was activated. At first, the system picked up nothing but static and faint electromagnetic interference. But then, at exactly 3:17 a.m., the signal shifted. A low hum emerged, steady, pulsing, rhythmic. It lasted 11 minutes. The technicians, many of them recruited from the Reich's top universities, believed it to be a naturally occurring phenomenon. Until the voices began. The initial transmission was faint. A garbled, phonetic language no one could identify. It wasn't German, Latin, or any known dialect. Some claimed it was reversed speech, others heard musical patterns. A few of the researchers believed the voices were speaking directly to them, not in words, but in intentions, emotions, urges. One man claimed he received a vivid image of a vast subterranean city carved from glowing stone. Another wept for hours, insisting the voices told him the Third Reich would drown in its own blood. Within days, the effects spread. The listening team began to suffer from intense migraines, nosebleeds, and insomnia. Several lost the ability to speak coherently, inventing their own languages made of clicks and gasps. One technician, Klaus Heller, gouged out his own eyes after claiming to see the voices crawling in the walls. But the SS commanders overseeing the project were not deterred. If anything, they became more invested. One report describes a senior officer insisting that the madness was proof of proximity to pure Vril contact, that the closer one came to the source, the more unstable the human mind became. They doubled the power to the resonator. On the night of March 9, 1944, the transmission came again, stronger, clearer. And this time, it was recorded. The surviving reel, smuggled out after the war and hidden in a Czech monastery, was analyzed decades later. Experts identified a consistent 4 Hz wave pattern, just below the threshold of human hearing, layered with a fluctuating tone that resembled human vocal ranges. Spectrogram analysis showed an image pattern within the audio, concentric spirals, like the shape of an ammonite fossil. This triggered a final phase of the experiment, the medium trials. The team selected 5 prisoners from Dachau, each with reported psychic sensitivity, and placed them inside a steel chamber beneath the resonator. They were dosed with mescaline and instructed to repeat a chant encoded from the previous Vril message. 3 of them died within 24 hours. One woman, identified only as Subject 5, survived. She claimed she had seen the eye open. Her skin was covered in circular burn marks in the shape of the spirals from the audio signal. Her heart rate remained elevated for 3 days. She spoke no words, only emitted a low hum that vibrated light bulbs nearby. Her last words, before she died, were recorded by a frightened technician. "It waits in the hollow sky. When we remember, it returns." Following her death, the resonator began to malfunction. The signals became increasingly erratic, then violent. On March 29, a sudden power surge triggered an explosion that killed 4 staff and destroyed half the facility. The remaining SS officers evacuated, and the entrance was collapsed with dynamite. The official explanation listed the site as an incomplete radar experiment. But some believe the transmissions never stopped. In 1962, a NATO radio technician stationed in southern Germany picked up a strange broadcast on a dead frequency. A sequence of tones followed by a whispering voice, unintelligible, but rhythmic. When the signal was triangulated, it pointed not to any active tower, but to the ruins of Station Black Echo. In 1998, hikers near Königssee reported strange electromagnetic interference, compasses spinning, phones losing power. One man claimed he heard music coming from beneath the ground. He described it as like church music, but in reverse. Today, the site remains sealed. No formal excavation has been approved, and satellite imagery shows nothing but rock and snow. But those who believe in the Vril theory claim the transmissions continue, hidden in the white noise of the world, waiting for minds sensitive enough to hear them. Because if the Nazis were right, if Vril is real, then somewhere, deep beneath our feet, something ancient is still speaking. And one day, someone will listen long enough to answer back. In the final months of the Second World War, deep within the Black Forest of southern Germany, a facility known only in SS archives as Schlafhof 12, or Sleep Farm 12, operated in complete isolation. Unlike most concentration or research camps, Schlafhof was not on any map, and not one known survivor ever spoke of its existence. But scattered documents, partially destroyed after the war, and a series of disturbing testimonies uncovered during post-war Soviet interrogations suggest that within this hidden compound, the Nazis pursued an experiment unlike any other. Their aim: to control dreams. The concept, known in internal memos as Traumsteuerung, dream steering, originated with the Ahnenerbe, the SS pseudoscientific research branch obsessed with ancient knowledge. Their belief was rooted in the idea that dreams were not just psychological residue, but a realm that could be accessed, navigated, and ultimately controlled. If they could reach into the unconscious minds of prisoners, or even soldiers, they could influence behavior, extract secrets, and instill obedience through sleep itself. Construction on Schlafhof 12 began in 1942. The facility was buried underground, beneath the ruins of a medieval monastery. The surrounding forest provided natural camouflage, and supply routes were disguised as routine Wehrmacht patrols. The lead architect of the project was Dr. Erich Roche, a neurologist turned SS officer, known for his radical theories on consciousness and what he called the weaponization of REM states. The core of the experiment was a sprawling chamber called the Tromsø, or Dream Hall. Dozens of bunk-like sleep pods were arranged in circular formation, each lined with wires connected to a central machine, the Sangergerät, named after Roche's belief that dreams could be sung into the mind like a lullaby. The machine pulsed with electromagnetic signals meant to stimulate targeted brain activity during sleep. Above each pod, rotating mirrors and projectors cast strange, silent images, fractals, shadowy figures, and symbols stolen from ancient Nordic texts. The subjects were a mix of prisoners, political dissidents, Roma, Jewish captives, and occasionally captured Soviet soldiers. They were put to sleep for days at a time, drugged with combinations of barbiturates and early tranquilizers. The goal wasn't rest, it was immersion. Once unconscious, the subjects were exposed to audio streams compiled from chants, coded Nazi propaganda, and subliminal messaging. Technicians monitored brainwave activity, looking for what Roche called dream convergence, moments where multiple subjects' brain patterns synchronized. He believed this was evidence of a shared dream environment. And then, the experiments intensified. Witness accounts from surviving technicians, obtained decades later by Eastern Bloc archivists, describe events that defied logic. Multiple subjects would awaken screaming the same word, though they'd never met. Others claimed to have seen the same figure in their dreams, a tall man with no face, dressed in a long SS officer's coat, whispering in a language they couldn't remember upon waking. Prisoners began losing their ability to differentiate between dreams and reality. One man, after 13 days of induced sleep, awoke convinced he had spent years inside a cold, endless forest. He refused to eat or speak, and later bit off his own fingers to wake up. But perhaps the most unsettling account was from Subject 26, a young woman from Prague who had shown a rare ability to recall every detail of her dreams. She was put through 47 sessions, each longer than the last. During her final session, she stopped breathing for nearly 2 minutes but revived without intervention. Upon awakening, she whispered only one phrase, over and over. "He walks between the beds." She was found dead in her cell 2 days later, having scratched her own eyes out with a broken spoon. As the war drew to a close, Allied forces pushed closer to the region, and the SS ordered all documents from Schlafhof 12 destroyed. But something went wrong. Soviet troops, advancing toward the area in April 1945, reported radio interference and strange, rhythmic broadcasts on all frequencies near the forest. A reconnaissance team entered the ruined monastery, but only one man returned. According to the Soviet debrief, the man was incoherent, emaciated, and repeating a German phrase, "Nicht schlafen, ist hier." Don't sleep, he is here. Inside the ruins, the troops found the Tromsø empty, save for one working machine, the Sangergerät, still humming. Every sleep pod was unoccupied, but the indentations on the mattresses suggested someone, or something, had left recently. The walls were covered in charcoal drawings, black spirals, silhouettes of men without faces and eyes. Hundreds of eyes. The machine was dismantled and taken to a research facility in Moscow. But according to a memo dated 1951, it was destroyed without analysis due to unauthorized activation during transit. No further explanation was given. Today, the site of Schlafhof 12 remains sealed. The surrounding woods are part of a protected area, off-limits to all but military and forestry personnel. Some hikers claim their GPS systems fail when approaching the area. Others have reported hearing soft lullabies echoing through the trees, even when completely alone. In 1987, a French journalist investigating Nazi occult sites in Germany received a brown envelope with no return address. Inside was a photo of the Dream Hall before its abandonment. Dusty, silent, with all pods open, and a single handwritten note. "They learned how to enter our dreams. But they never learned how to leave. The Nazis never succeeded in turning dreams into weapons. But what they left behind was far worse. The idea that somewhere, in the echo of an abandoned machine, the dreams they shaped may still be unfolding, long after the dreamers are gone. Every case adds a new layer of mystery, leaving more questions than answers. Which one lingers in your mind, and what's your take on what really happened?